Despite her elaborate costumes and complex music videos, Bjork doesn't seem to overcomplicate her musical process, but I bet you do. If there's one thing that we've all become great at in 2024, it's overcomplicating things. And this is especially true in the music production side of YouTube. Compared to the time of Bjork's Homogenic, we definitely have more accumulated knowledge, but do we have more wisdom?
MIDI chord tag.
One thing I am sure of though is that there are at least 3 things that every producer can steal from how Bjork made her album Homogenic, and that these things will help develop their skills and stop overcomplicating the process. But before I tell you what the first thing you should steal is, I have to tell you about the biggest mistake I made when I was learning how to produce music. I'd spent my teenage years and early adulthood studying to be a jazz guitarist and composer, but I eventually practiced myself to the point of injury, which forced me to stop playing for a while. I distracted myself from my resulting depression by learning about production, but before long, I realized I actually liked it more than playing guitar. But this is where things got weird. Along with this change of medium came a complete change in identity. I completely rejected jazz, I rejected all the musical skills that I had learned before this, and I was completely committed to electronic genres like hip-hop, pop, and glitch. Even if I heard that one of my songs needed a jazz chord or a guitar part, I would bend over backwards to do anything but one of those things. And Bjork did not do that.
I left my music school, classical music school, when I was 15, and gave them the big finger and all classical music is wrong.
Okay, she did it for a time, but not forever.
I think you sort of look back on all the things that influenced you, and you actually realize that if you like it or not, there have been things that influenced you and you can't ignore them. And I think the strings in Homogenic were very much about me confronting that.
My point is not that we should go out and hire string players, but instead of rejecting our past influences and skill sets, we should embrace all of it. Keeping an open mind will actually help us progress quicker and will often yield more interesting results. But there's a giant caveat to this point, which leads me to the second thing that we should all steal from Bjork. See if you can spot the problem in this next story. Imagine Bjork hires you to produce her next album.
Please make me drums that sound like lava oozing out of the ground, like in my homeland of Iceland.
It's the 90s after all, so you use a 909 drum machine and show it to Bjork.
Oh no, this is all wrong. Try something else.
Well, if she doesn't want a 909, she must want an 808.
I forgot to tell you that I don't want an 808 on this either.
What about bongos? You want to give up and doom scroll for a few hours, but the nagging guilt of not having a real job eventually gets the better of you. So you pretend to be productive by sitting at the computer and slapping random effects on that 909 drum loop with little to no thought about what you're doing. Hours later, Bjork is in your room for some reason.
It's perfect.
Huh? Just because you start out with a 909 or any instrument doesn't mean that that's the sound that you have to end up with, because no amount of skill as a traditional composer, arranger, or performer will ever be able to match the evocative possibilities of sound design. By the way, sound design doesn't only mean programming synth patches from scratch. You can get a lot of mileage out of processing the heck out of traditional sound sources, even with stock plugins. Just like rejecting your previous influences and skill sets can be a huge barrier to progress, the same can be true about ignoring the possibilities of sound design that computers afford us. That being said, here's a prediction for you. You're going to start exploring sound design, turning every knob you can find in your DAW and adding more sound design layers than you know what to do with. You're going to start feeling like you know what you're doing, that you can do anything, that you should do everything. But eventually you'll hit a wall when you realize that there's limitless options with digital sound design, and so you'll feel like you actually know nothing at all, and this will make you stop making music. But here's the thing. This isn't a knowledge problem. At least it isn't only a knowledge problem. And this leads me to the last thing that we should steal from Bjork. the 90s. Take a look at some of the main tools that were used to make Homogenic. The QY20, a portable sequencer, allows up to 8 tracks and 100 noises. Bjork wrote many of her songs in the 4 years before Homogenic on this and similar machines. In her home studio, she has a more elaborate mixing board to work on her demos, and in the professional studio, she has access to a slightly larger console and a computer that looks like this. Now, what do all these tools have in common? The QY20 and the mixing boards have finite amount of tracks and limited effects. And a computer like this probably doesn't even have 1% of the processing power of our smartphones. One of the most common traps that beginning producers fall into, myself included, is overproducing. Because they lack the confidence in their abilities, they compensate by adding layers upon layers, stacking absurd amount of effects and processing, and trying all the fancy tricks they've seen in YouTube videos. Now go listen to Homogenic again. There are very few vocal doubles or vocal stacks. The electronic sounds are simple yet bold in their design. And Björk even stated this about her intention going into the album.
Because it's one flavor. Instead of like all these different instruments, it's just going to be beats, strings, and voice.
Now, some of you will view any amount of limitations as a creative burden that should be dispensed with, but most experienced creatives will tell you that limitations can actually reduce overwhelm and have a liberating effect. Had she wanted to layer a lot more, she could have done so even at that time in a number of ways, such as the tape-to-tape reductions that the Beatles used 30 years earlier. No, these are self-imposed limitations, yet to me the album doesn't seem lacking in any area. In fact, it sounds complete to me. Impose even the most basic of restrictions, such as track limits, only using stock plugins, or a limited instrumental palette, and watch your skills develop faster than they ever have before. So instead of making more choices, make fewer but better choices. And you might even start to enjoy yourself while you do it. Speaking of the Beatles, they probably had more technological limitations than any of us will ever experience in our musical career, but they also had a pretty limited musical knowledge. So you might want to watch this video to see how they developed upon their basic knowledge over time and eventually created memorable chord progressions that we're still talking about today.